We've got a special treat here tonight. Of course, you know them both well. Our panel, Lisa Goddard and Kristy McSweeney. Thanks so much, guys, for coming in here tonight. And we were just talking about small business and employment and the headaches that all of that is putting on the economy. But there's another thing that I think is also stressing the economy that maybe we don't talk enough about, or some people shy away from, and that is the pressure of immigration. And the new immigration numbers have just been released here. We have a surge back in 2025, apparently, with net overseas migration bouncing back up to around 447,620, if my math is correct. Now, the government had promised that they would bring these numbers down, but we all know what these numbers mean, particularly for A, wages, bringing down wages, and also B, the housing crisis here, as well as also other issues like pressures on schools and universities. Kristy McSweeney, let me start with you on this here. Don't we need to have a much more frank conversation about who we let into this country and for what purpose? Because you see all the time these stories about so-called skilled migrants coming in for whatever profession, and yet those professions still claim that they're hungry for workers, like in hospitality.
Yeah, look, I think we do need to have a really mature, constructive conversation, which on the one hand is the great benefits of immigration and the great contribution that migrants have made to the fabric of Australian society over decades now. But on the other hand is Australia in the right economic position? And by economic position, I mean with infrastructure in terms of our cities, in particularly in housing arrangements, but not only that, in just the livability of our cities. And with that conversation, we have to have that conversation around controlling immigration to geography. Perhaps it's time to talk about decentralisation again. Perhaps it's time to talk about getting people directed out of Melbourne and Sydney, where the housing crisis is really, really extreme and where most migrants want to come to. Perth, of course, as well, has a huge housing crisis too. There is hardly any rental availability, let alone houses to buy. So it's expanded across the Nullarbor, where Perth was, a few years ago, somewhere where people were migrating to live that great Australian dream. Now it's just as stuck as Melbourne and Sydney. So that mature conversation has to be had. It's really plain that we just don't have the capacity to house more people in this country. We don't.
Well,
we have to have a discussion about that.
We do. And Lisa, the thing that strikes me too is that we also talk about this huge housing boom that we're having, but we're not actually talking about what that housing means. And it seems like, from generation to generation, we are seeing this downgrade of expectations where, our parents might have expected to have a house in a yard. A younger generation here now will expect to maybe have a flat that has 1.5 bedrooms or 2 tiny bedrooms or whatever a developer has been allowed to get away with. And we see it in Brisbane and in Perth and in Sydney and in Melbourne and every place. And it feels to me that, whatever the benefits are of bringing in people for the economy, it also is having some real flow-on effects to what we once called proudly the Australian way of life, Lisa.
Yeah, and that great Australian dream of a hills hoist and a swing set in the backyard just seems unattainable now to so many people. I know here in Queensland, the government has a special state-facilitated legislation in place where they can actually give developers extra ease to build up further, as long as they include in there a certain percentage of affordable housing. So, and you're talking affordable housing is even a unit which is costing more than $1 million. So when you're a young couple starting out, that's an awful lot of money and a big deposit that you have to then find. And yes, governments across the country are trying to find subsidies and ways to make it easier for people to get in, but they need the stock, and that's the problem. And as I said before, if you've got builders going to the wall, who's going to build all of these houses? And they're already, a year into this program of wanting to deliver 1.2 million homes. And I think the latest figures I saw, they were still 55,000 behind their target a year in. So it just isn't happening. And the conversation that Kristy's talking about and that you talk about all the time, James, if you start that conversation, you talk about the number of people coming in, you're then deemed to be racist. So that's the problem we have in this society, that dare you talk about it, you're considered to be racist and you're discriminating, not the fact that we don't have the infrastructure to support the number of people that we're bringing in. And if you look at those figures, an awful lot of those are now international students because guess what? The universities have a really strong lobby voice.